Sally Monastery, and I'm president of Scripps Fine Arts Foundation, and I am very happy to welcome you here this afternoon. Especially would like to thank the director of Williamson, Erin Curtis, and her crew, Tina Chini and Kurt Delman, for the setup and for inviting us to meet here again today. Nancy describes herself as an ecofeminist, and she has done a lot of work exploring the interrelationship of nature and culture, and I think that couldn't be any truer than in the exhibit that we have here today. Definite variety in the meeting. She has had shows in lots of different places, the Municipal Art Gallery in Los Angeles. She has several bodies of work investigating the Honeybee Society, the myths and symbolism, and the book, The Fragile Bee from The Fragile Bee, I noticed is on display out here in the foyer. She is a member of the Scripps College faculty, and she's been in town since 1986. She teaches classes in studio art, media studies, and gender and women's studies. She established the Scripps Digital Art Program in 1990, and she served as chair of the Department of Art and Art History, chair of the Gender and Women's Studies Department, and interim chair of the Media Studies Department. She currently holds the Mary W. Johnson Professorship in Teaching. And so, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Nancy Macko.
Hello, everyone, and I'm so glad you sort of made the comment about the multiple themes in this work, because I'm going to break the talk down and kind of address some of those parts as we go along. Thank you all for coming, and Happy New Year. It's my pleasure to share my work with you today, and I'd like to begin by thanking and acknowledging Erin Curtis, Gabrielle Junkels-Winkler, director of the Ruth Chandler Williamson Gallery, for inviting me to have this exhibition and for making this process so enjoyable and collaborative. Her curatorial vision is the result we see here today. I would also like to acknowledge Janine Vigas for her inspired design work of the catalog, which you'll see out in the foyer, and the design of the exhibition. Thanks to the wonderful Williamson Gallery staff, Kirk Delman, T. Pacini, John Trendler, and Jan Blair, for all the support and assistance they have provided during the run of the exhibition since October. Special thanks to Sally Monastier for organizing this event, Catherine McIntosh for always her behind-the-scenes work, and Eddie Gonzalez for his media wizardry. I've arranged this talk to focus on several of the themes in the work that it addresses and engages with, sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly. And to do so, I decided to draw from the insights of the writers that contributed to the accompanying catalog. After I found these pictures, I thought I should have used AI, but I didn't. I just went to some realty office. When I was in my 20s, I had the opportunity to live on a 400-acre farm in western Wisconsin. It sort of looked like this, for about a year. In addition to raising pigs, we sowed corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. Coming from Long Island, I had a lot to learn and learn to respect. This was the Back to the Land movement of the 70s, and I witnessed a cultural consciousness raising about food, how it was grown, farmed, and harvested. Out went white bread, as well as processed food and fast food. In came food co-ops selling organic produce, whole grains, and tofu. This experience changed my awareness of how our food was processed and gave me the tools to analyze food labels and to grow my own food. Hypothetical. That year at the farm, we started our vegetable seeds in a makeshift indoor greenhouse in February. This is western Wisconsin. It's cold. So we could then plant them as soon as the last frost had passed. Our garden was about 1/8 of an acre. I learned a lot about rototilling, mulching, and compost. Pigs naturally generate a lot of very effective fertilizer. That summer, we canned like crazy. String beans and tomatoes and pickles with dill and garlic. We preserved fruit jams of strawberries with rhubarb and marmalade of red grapefruits from Texas. This experience informed and reinforced my understanding of the cycle of life and how all of life is interconnected, a concept that, in conjunction with ecofeminism, has been a part of my art practice ever since. In particular, I saw the plight of the bees as a call to action, a social and political action with its roots in feminism, requiring a mindfulness about our place in the universe and the purpose of our lives. For over 2 decades, I have worked with honeybee imagery and media. This work culminated in The Fragile Bee, which was first exhibited at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, California in 2015, and will open at the San Bernardino Museum of Art this Friday through June in its 20th national venue. It's been traveling for 6 years. Decompositions extends my earlier photographic series, Botanical Portraits, which examined the intersection of bees and plants. In Decompositions, I move from garden bees to kitchen compost, and from looking at the whole cycle of a plant's life, from bud to bloom to seed, to concentrating on the end of life, evident in food scraps. In the catalog essay, Light and Death, Nancy Macko's Photographic Metamorphosis, Lindy B. Lettinen, Senior Curator of Photography at the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, provides a wonderful history of botanical photography. Photographers have long had an interest in representing organic elements in a range of formats. Briefly here, for time's sake, are a few. William Henry Fox Talbot, the inventor of photography on paper and the photographic negative, this is from, you read it because I have the reading glasses on. Initially experimented with laying individual leaves, ferns, and grasses directly on top of a sheet of photosensitized paper and exposing it to light to capture the precise outline of each specimen. He referred to these as photogenic drawings. Anna Atkins made cyanotype studies of British algae in 1843. Her cyanotypes have always held a fascination for me, not only for the detail, but also because they are hybrid prints of photography and printmaking, another media that I have spent many years working in. Early 20th century photographers, such as Charles Jones here, and Edward Weston, generated luminous vegetable studies that are some of the most iconic still lifes in the history of the medium. And the title of this, from the ranch of Mr. Kercheval, Sacramento River, 203 pairs, weight 85 pounds, and it's a stereograph somewhere from 1865 to 1873. Okay, so this is Charles Jones, who generated luminous vegetable studies as well, and this is a close-up of a bean study, and it's gold-toned silver gelatin on paper. There are 2 photographs by Edward Weston in the Scripps collection, who also did many vegetable studies. It's intriguing for me to think that these inhabit the same space as my own elegiac peppers, such as Wound here from 2020. Lindy writes, when Nancy Macko's mother passed away in 2011, a friend gave her an orchid plant that she slowly observed deteriorate over time. The process of watching a living thing fade away resonated with the experience of caring for her mother, who battled dementia and cognitive decline in her final years. Macko would sit with her mother in the garden of her Claremont home and simultaneously photograph the tender, minute details of the vivid flowers that surrounded them. These close-ups of flora And on the left, we have the beginning of my macro photography. This is from a bouquet of roses, April 2008. And using a macro lens with natural light became the series Intimate Spaces. And then on the right, you see the same image in a layered work called Hopes and Dreams, a visual memoir, which was dedicated to my mom. This is 2010, and she passed in 2011. This was also a period when she developed an interest in plant material. Oh, right, and it was true. After my mother passed away, I got really interested in the most deteriorating part of the plants, in their most desiccated and abject state. These shifting forms, the push and pull of what Macko refers to as active decomposition and end of life, have since propelled her to probe the relationship between vegetal matter and photography in the visually dense series Decompositions, end quote, by Lindy. These are actually seed pods from cyclamen. Who knew? I think we started to compost in our home around 2011, but it wasn't until we were isolated at home during COVID that I became really aware of the natural choreography occurring in the kitchen compost container. During COVID, the year of sequestration, my home was my solace. Serious health challenges early in that year meant that we had to rely on friends to do our grocery shopping, and one never knew what the stores would have in stock. Friends would arrive masked and gloved at our gate with whatever they'd been able to procure. In turn, and also gloved, we would retrieve the grocery bags and thoroughly wipe down everything that they had brought. We experimented with new recipes to give being at home a surprise and a little drama. As this may have happened to you, time slowed down and the decomposition happened naturally. The kitchen compost became a source of great inspiration as it represented not only what scraps we could recycle, but also the love and care that went into the preparation of our food. My wife, Jan, and chef extraordinaire was by default the curator of the bin. I became a keen observer as I watched the compost materials decompose and make the magical transition from solid to liquid through the chemical process of decomposition. I'm always aware of the light, and many of the images give evidence to the time of day and season. Light and shadow move through the compost bin to create differing layering and visual effects. So I could say at this point that I take the bin outside and I shoot in direct light in sunlight. So it makes a difference what time of day, what month, what season we're in. Even though people think in California we only have one season, those of us who live here know that we have at least 4. Shot in November, when the angle of the sun is lower, warmer tones come through in green web. During the month of August, when the sun casts more direct light over the bin, images like divine intervention seem to radiate. Garlic sheaves was shot in early summer, when the appearance of the sun is more variable. It started with the asparagus. Noticing how the ends of the stems fell in perfect symmetry, like little Lincoln logs, as they tumbled into the container. As more elements were added, the composition continued to shift. It didn't matter how much of an ingredient was added. Each part only made the whole more complex and more interesting. As they decomposed, the organic scraps created mysterious, evocative compositions that resembled, to me, Dutch masters' vanitas paintings, as well as abstract expressionist works. And sometimes the composition or the palette would remind me of snippets of images from art history, the paintings of Peter Bruegel the Elder, the figure of an odalisque, 18th century still life paintings, even the works of Jackson Pollock. Although photographic, this work clearly straddles the genres of abstract and landscape paintings. Naming the images was elusive, yet intuitive. And often the titles would come to me as I was shooting, and I would be so involved in the subject matter and the composition of what I was looking at that names and words and ideas would sort of float through, and I'd keep little notes as I went along. I was reminded, though, of the preface of Michel Foucault's Order of Things. Foucault is a famous French philosopher who wrote a lot about ideas of gender and language and syntax. In the Order of Things, he discusses the taxonomy or categorization of how we organize things so that their meaning or function makes sense to us. His notion of a space called heterotopia was an alternative to utopia and dystopia. It's a concept that, quote, describes certain cultural, institutional, and discursive or spread out spaces that are somehow other, disturbing, intense, incompatible, contradictory, or transforming, unquote. In other words, heterotopias are disturbing, probably because they secretly undermine language, because they make it impossible to name this and that, because they shatter or tangle common names, because they destroy syntax in advance. Not only the syntax with which we construct sentences, but also that less apparent syntax which causes words and things, like next to and opposite one another, to hold together. You can read a few quotes from Foucault's text as they are interspersed throughout this exhibition. For example, the culture superimposed on them another kind of grid, which neutralized them, which by this superimposition both revealed and excluded them at the same time. Definitely in opposition. And heterotopias desiccate speech, stop words in their tracks, contest the very possibility of grammar at its source. They dissolve our myths and sterilize the lyricism of our sentences. Looking at these images, it's as though we are seeing such spaces as heterotopias, spaces where things are different, spaces that are queering our reality and sense of normalcy. In From Memento Mori to Visual Alchemy, Professor Emerita of Art History and former director of the Williamson Gallery, many of you know Mary Davis McNaughton, writes, one could say that Macko's works create heterotopias of place and time, in that the locations they depict unsettle our expectations because these spaces are both actual and virtual. What I was looking at was defying normal classifications. Binary dualities are softened with the permeability of solid to liquid. Either or gives way to both and. Titles could do the same. Titles like Garlic Cotton, Onion Eels, and Garlic Wings Nebula could provide hints, suggestions, and humor that invite the viewer in as you consider the work. The central motif of decay in these images aligns with the artistic trope of memento mori, roughly translated, remember that you die. Traditionally considered a minor genre in comparison to religious subjects, still life painting was elevated by Baroque artist Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, 1571 to 1610, who made the subject serious by merging realism and symbolism. In still life with fruit on a ledge, Caravaggio rendered an array of ripe fruit while simultaneously referring to life and death. He understood that still life could encompass both literal description and subtle illusion. And I reference his example in still life after Caravaggio, in which the light and dark are reminiscent of Baroque-style painting. McNaughton continues, Macko belongs to a tradition of women artists who found still life to be a rich subject. In the Renaissance and Baroque eras, still life painting was dominated by male artists, but certain women painters of the late 16th and 17th centuries made significant contributions to the genre. Rachel Roush was a Dutch botanical artist whose paintings attracted international collectors. Ruth was acclaimed during her lifetime and is one of the most documented painters in early 18th century Netherlands. She was best known for her lifelike paintings of abundant flower bouquets that seem natural rather than composed. Her perceptive observations were inspired by her visits to botanical gardens, excuse me, and work with her physician and botanist father, who collected specimens of plants and insects that he carefully embalmed so that they looked alive. Similarly, in her painting here, Fruit and Insects, Ruth gives a peach and fly an uncanny, lifelike quality. In this work, Ruth evokes harvest in a glistening array of grapes, peaches, and nectarines, while adding a fly and a butterfly that suggests decay and death, as well as change and transformation. Both Ruth and Macko reward the viewer who looks slowly and closely and who discovers in the process surprising details. Whereas in Fruit and Insects, Ruth lands a fly on a peach, in Vigil, Macko tucks a bee next to a lemon peel. Also my homage to my bee work. In Divine Intervention, Macko captures a few tiny ants that for the viewer at first glance appear like grains of pepper. So I'll be the pointer. And if you memorize this section, it's up there. So when I photograph the bin, I pan the entire thing and click on lots of little specific areas. And I'll do a full side, like compression on the blue wall when you first come in, and then I'll pan and find different moments or intervals or brilliant compositions that have occurred by nature for me to share with you. In Still Life with Fairy Lights and Dying Time, and Choke-Still Fairy, which is a place where the fairies live, Macko creates natural fantasy worlds that seem pre-Raphaelite in mood. The pre-Raphaelites, circa 1848, drew inspiration from 14th and 15th century Italian art. They believed art should be as similar to the real world as possible, and they prized photorealistic accuracy. So I'm right up there with them. Unquote. Thank you, Professor McNaughton. Images such as tomato clouds capture seldom seen moments of transition from ripe to rotten. Instead of ignoring this process, as most do by consigning leftover food to the trash, I observe it and I engage with it, sort of like embracing the future that's coming. Implicit is the question, when does food cross over from being valued to discarded? Garbage or compost? In her essay, McNaughton comments, Macko's vision resonates with works of other artists who have dwelled on transformation. Like surrealists Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo, Macko creates an imaginary visual universe. Carrington and Varo also shared an interest in ancient matriarchal societies, a subject that Macko explored in earlier paintings, prints, and digital media that were featured in her large mid-career exhibition, Hive Universe. Yet the works of these artists diverge. In paintings, Carrington and Varo invented magical other worlds of bizarre personages. By contrast, in her digital photographs, Macko finds magic in this world in her garden and compost. Magnification is a method of converting the simple into the extraordinary and transforming the familiar into the unfamiliar, a strategy also employed by surrealists, unquote. By shifting scale, the work alters our understanding of what we see. In decompositions, the small are converted into the large and make the forgotten memorable. For example, in Kali Olive, tiny cauliflower florets couched in dark green stalks have the dynamic energy of a Baroque sculpture. In weather patterns, gaseous clouds from disintegrating lettuce leaves echo a satellite view of the Earth's atmosphere. And in Light in the Creek, a fennel frond is transformed into a giant tree. Printing these works in the large format draws the viewer in and allows me to share what I am discovering through the camera. Eleanor Hartney is a contributing editor to Art in America and Art Press, and the author of numerous books on contemporary art. Most recently, Mothers of Invention, The Feminist Roots of Contemporary Art. In her essay, Changing States and Gorgeous Decay, she writes, Macko's celebration of decomposition grows out of her feminist convictions. It is part of a larger interest in erasing the boundaries between humans and other parts of nature. She has for many years worked with bees, creating multimedia works that draw connections between the social structure of bee colonies and the lost histories of matriarchal cultures. Her desire to mix categories, erase borders, and celebrate fluidity are in keeping with the ideas of various pioneering feminist writers, such as historian Carolyn Merchant, whose 1980 book, The Death of Nature, was one of the founding documents of ecofeminism. Merchant took issue with Western culture's paradigm of dominion and conquest as it pertains both to women and to the natural world. Ecofeminism discerns and fosters interconnections between society, nature, and the cosmos. Garlic Wings Nebula is simultaneously cosmic and intimate, as a translucent garlic skin flutters like the wings of a celestial being. Because composting involves the recognition that life and non-life are engaged in a continual process of exchange and transformation, it provides the perfect metaphor for a new paradigm for social organization. Compost refuses to set one state or one life form over another, as does nature. Instead, it displaces humans from their privileged place at the top of the food chain, unquote. A final note by Mary McNaughton states, Macko's vision resonates with works of other artists who have dwelled on transformation. There is a hint of surrealist metamorphic imagery in which foodstuff transmutes into other life forms. In Loch Ness, a celery stalk becomes a strange hybrid creature, at once vegetal and animal. In Odalisque, cabbage leaves fold like fleshy pillows, and silken, swooning contours recall the languid French odalisques of Jean-Auguste Dominique Ang, 1814, and Manet's, and this is Ang's Grand Odalisque, and Manet's famous Olympia of 1863, which is what I thought of when I made that photograph. And Jan and I actually went to New York last December to see this painting in person. It was the first time it had been out of the Louvre in I don't know how many years, and there was a Degas-Manet comparison exhibition at the Met. So you got your 10 seconds to stand in front of it by yourself, which was pretty cool. In case you didn't know, the definition of odalisque is that this particular pose incorporates a central reclined figure, usually female, typically upon a divan. The pose is commonly realized by the female figure and often associated with seduction and exoticism. It often refers to a female slave or a concubine. Eleanor Hartney continues, in this work, compost is shorthand for the intermingling of species, ideas, and states of being. As both metaphor and reality, compost represents the principle of change and transformation. Using photography, a medium that historically has been considered an instrument of objective truth, these compositions exist in a state of indeterminacy. At a moment when it is too easy to imagine society, nature, and culture careening toward an irrevocable and inevitable end, compost offers a message of hope. In this dark time, it is a promise of rebirth, an invitation to imaginative freedom, and a charge to align ourselves with the forces of change, unquote. The images in Decompositions are meant to present you with an unknown realm to experience and consider. My collaboration with composting continues to sustain me in my photographic explorations. In closing, Erin Curtis deftly describes the cyclical aspects of the work in the foreword. Quote, "The series represents an inward turn for Macko, a meditation on daily rituals of preparing, consuming, and discarding food, as well as a nod to her past experiences of agricultural labor, painting, and teaching art. Yet the pieces also look outward, gesturing grandly to the history of art and the cycles of life, engaging the viewer in making these connections and inviting novel interpretations," unquote. Thank you. Sure, yeah.
Nancy will take a few questions, and I ask you to pretend you're out on a school playground and you're trying to get your person out the other end so that we can all hear your questions. Yes?
My compost bucket is under my sink. It's opaque, and there's no way I could get the lateral views that it seems like you get. How do you do this?
So our compost bin is something people might use for cornflakes or dry cat food. So it's not very wide. It's clear plastic, a little bit milky, but not super milky. And it has a snap on top. So I can see through it every day.
Okay. Do you add water?
No, because the biology teacher who brought his microbiome and art class here explained to us that 70% of all our cells, plants and animals, is water. And as it begins to disintegrate, the first thing it releases is water. So I have not added water to any of these. This is all generated by the materials in the bin.
And about how long? I mean, you must have several bins now.
No, I have two. I have one for the really icky stuff that Claremont takes away, you know, like the rotty stuff. This is the good stuff. But it depending on what's at the bottom and how, like celery or something really watery, it'll start breaking down in 2 or 3 days. And then we just keep building. And so you get that kind of beautiful geological strata, like in compression. So the stuff at the top is actually still quite fresh. And it's just, you know, the ends of things that you wouldn't normally cook. But we get the whole range. They're digital. They're all digital. So I have a database in a program called Lightroom, and that's where I choose the 1 or 2 or 3 out of the 25 I've shot. That's digital spoils you that way. You can just overdo it. And then I edit them.
I just wanted to add on to the other question. You don't manipulate these objects inside at all.
No, it ruins them. You know, there's this fantastic artist, Andy Goldsworthy. Many of you might know his work. And he works, you know, very intimately with nature. But he replicates it, he manipulates it, and he copies it. And it feels like it. It looks like somebody has had dominion over this moment. And I don't want that. This is such a gift. It's remarkable. So if you took your bin out from under the sink and, you know, before it goes all the way, and you watched it at the top, you'd see. It's like when the leaves fall, or like, you know, we had big wind last night and your yard's a mess, whatever. But it's perfect. It's, you know, it's perfect. You can't make that happen. You can't even, well, they do in fabulous movies, but in general, you just can't control nature. There was a, yes?
So in looking at all of your work, do you find that when you go to the store, does this affect how you
and that's such a smart question. No, you're so right. I mean, when I did puree the persimmons, I did think about, at what point do I want to put this stuff in the bin? But that, and I didn't photograph that. No, it's whatever Jan decides we're having. What are we chopping? What's in the fridge? Just like at your house. Like, what are we having now? And then in it goes, and it's unplanned, which is another beautiful part of it that I like. Sometimes we'll stop. I'll say, don't put another thing in, because it's just like doing this perfect elevation and the light's coming through in a certain way and it's soft. And other times, it'll be too jam-packed and I'm like, I mean, I have thousands of pictures. This is only 38. Yeah. Yes.
You use the term querying reality. Can you explain what that means to you?
Yes. Many of us have been conditioned in the binary system of male-female, right and wrong, black and white, these polar opposite things that are meant to be pushed apart and separated and never the twain shall be. And I think that there's a merging space between those opposites that's confusing, it's discursive, it's could be discomforting, it could be exciting. It's a queer space. It's a space where things that are not easily categorized breathe, can exist and have life. And I really appreciate Foucault for that. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
I'm impressed by the vividness of the colors in many of these. Can you speak to that?
Yes, ma'am. Part of it is these were printed on a really special digital paper called Fujiflex in a light jet printer at a lab on the west side. And there's something about the quality of this paper that really adds vividness and life to the images. When I brought my proofs to them, this is what I expected. And then we did a lot of tweaking in order to get that result to match my proofs, because my proofs were smaller. But I had already gotten the pictures to be at the level that I wanted them to be. But this material just added an extra. The other thing about these is they are faced with plexiglass, but it's a matte plexi. So there's no glare, and it kind of makes you think you're looking through something, just like you would be looking through the wall of the compost bin. So it sort of adds an extra.
Well, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.